TLDR, a LARP started with a thunderstorm. This is a small one. A LARP event was about to start and suddenly the wind changed, grew in power, and turned cold. This means that a storm is coming to you soon. So we forgot the starting of the LARP and got into unfinished buildings. I used my shield to cover my head of the rain, and we sung songs while rain was pouring throughout everywhere, and we were completely damp. That's a great way to start a 3-day event where there's no electricity, heating, or ways to dry your stuff. But it wasn't as bad as when about 4 hours later after the start, so around 2 to 3 a.m., I came back to my tent to sleep, and there are 2 inches of water at the floor level in it. So then I spent 20 minutes scooping water out of my tent to sleep somewhere that wasn't qualified as a kiddie pool. That's it. And this is one of the reasons that I'm no longer flocking LARP. Now, I've never gone LARPing myself, but I imagine events like this really help contextualize the kinds of trials your D&D adventurers have to go through on a daily basis. I used to get mad when my character in Morrowind would be out of breath after running for 10 minutes in the middle of a thunderstorm, until little Jacob the Crowe did cross-country in high school, and realized he had to run up an 80-degree incline in the middle of a rainstorm. As you could imagine, I stopped yelling at my Argonian after that. My name is Jacob Crowe, and welcome to the Crow's Perch, where in addition to collecting the tears of Spider-Man 2 players who are still salty about Baldur's Gate 3 blowing at the flock out in every category during the Game Awards,
The ceiling's salt, the floor is salt, the walls are salt, and to an extent the air is salt.
I also cover horror stories from my favorite hobby, tabletop role-playing games. And so, without further ado, let's gather up a murder and dive into today's stories. I don't know if this qualifies as a horror story, so much as the regular sad reality of this hobby, but here goes. So I started a campaign with 4 people from another hobby I'm involved in. It worked out really well. So well that I ended up with 4 other people wanting to play, and another 4 I had to turn down. So I ran a short campaign with 8 characters, with probably 5 more or less consistent ones. It was a blast, even taking into account a few bumps along the way. Everyone was super excited to start another campaign. And even as I said I wanted this one to be more consistent, everyone promised they'd be able to make our weekly time. The first game of the new campaign went great, and even with a few more bumps, it ended with everyone super stoked for the next games. Except there were no next games. From that day forward, every weekly session had at least 3 of the 7 who had to cancel, usually the night before or the day of. Some even canceling after the session was supposed to start, or just not responding to me at all. Note, these are people I see multiple times a week, and with whom I'd check with a, "You coming to the session this week?" every week. So I decided that the 3 people who are always there could do a session without the others, which evolved into me resetting them into their own campaign as the 3 of them. What fun! Except that this was over a month ago, and now at least one of them has had to cancel each weekend since then. It's become a joke of sorts. Haha, next week will be a fun start to a new campaign, but it really has sucked a lot of my creative energy and excitement for the game. Each week for the past 2.5 months, I've worked on some patch or piece of the game session I planned for that weekend, only for the rug to be pulled out from under me. Often on the morning of the session itself. Not to mention that I could be using that time to hang out with other people. Now, some of the initial large group of inconsistent players have learned of this sub-game, and are annoyed that they weren't invited, even though many of them were missing consistently from the start of the first campaign. Part of me wants to just cancel it all, and play with the part of my original group that's happened to move to my area. I like sharing the hobby with new people, but this is ridiculous. Overcommitment and scheduling. Name a more iconic duo. I'll wait. While not the cause of the most severe of horror stories, they're definitely the cause of the majority of them. It's part of the reason why I only really play big campaigns with people I know, as it's really easy to spread yourself thin and sign up for like 10 games, only to realize that there are 7 days in a week, not 10. And unless you're planning on telling your manager at your job that you can't make it to work today because of beholder-related reasons, it's gonna be a little tricky to balance that whole schedule thing out. Back in the early summer of 2023, I ran a text-based TTRPG over Discord, based off of the webcomic Homestuck. I had played in one of these before, ran by my now ex-friend Toby, and as a longtime DM, I wanted a piece of the pie. I drew up a general session plot outline beforehand, and invited my usual TTRPG posse, with one notable exception. Myself and my ex-boyfriend. Let's call him Sam. had recently gotten back together after about 3 years of being broken up, but remaining friends. We had met in 2018, and started dating not long after, due to our mutual love of Undertale and JoJo's Bizarre Adventure. He was actually the one who eventually got me into Homestuck in the first place. We were both quite young at the time, about 14, and our relationship was never the most healthy thing, due to us being asshole teenagers. However, we were both lonely and bored, so we decided to give things another try. We'd both changed a lot as people, at least I had. He had certainly matured to an extent, but retained some of his bad habits, specifically refusing to ever admit he was wrong in the slightest, including when it came to his own opinions, and even things that everyone else could tell were mental delusions. So, the game started. I sent people the doc template for their character sheets, and his first submission for a character was a clown troll. Trolls are humanoid aliens in the Homestuck universe, based off of the Toontown games. His current hyperfixation. Now, this wouldn't be important to bring up, but this came with the notable addition that he believed his character should use infinitely regenerating pies as a weapon. I tried to explain to him that that wasn't in one of the available weapon classes, and if he wanted to use a fragile object as an improvised weapon, it would be a one-time use thing. Not too great for a long-term weapon. And besides, considering the tone of this campaign wouldn't make much room for an overtly silly character, I asked that he could come up with something else, which he obliged to. He comes up with a character named Calculus. He's got a math special interest, a member of a different alien species called cherubs. Calculus was your classic scientist archetype, conducting research on every weird thing that happens around him. This was a character I was more on board with, considering cherubs are very interesting as a species. I suggest you read their Homestuck wiki page if you don't mind spoilers, and the idea of a staunch and solitary researcher in a heavily supernatural setting enabled a lot of interesting plot threads. As soon as everyone had submitted their characters, we began playing. And things went very smoothly for the first month. I was absolutely enamored with the world I was building, and the players seemed just as invested as me. Lots of hijinks, lots of plot lines, lots of angst. One of the players, a guy called Kane, rolled a string of 7 nat 20s, which allowed him to break into a lab and artificially birth a cross-temporal godlike entity out of his own dead sister's consciousness. You know, the general fun stuff that comes with a very open-ended setting. Now, while everyone else was invested, Sam was ride or die to the next level. He played the most frequently out of anyone in the party, even to the point of pinging me to respond to his messages when I was doing something else or running something with another player. He was definitely the most invested in his character, and more specifically, he was invested in his character's relationship with another player's character. Now, remember when I mentioned Kane? That character was played by Toby, the DM from my first campaign. And Sam was obsessed with making Kane and Calculus fall in love. He talked about it a lot. He drew fan art, made memes about it, and tried his absolute darndest to make it canon. At first, we all treated it like a meme. We agreed that the two characters may be cute together, and the dynamic was hilarious to think about, considering Kane was a walking ball of rage and angst, and Calculus was a stoic, naive alien. However, Sam never backed down on this, and it got worse over time. He began DMing me ship concepts about Kane and Calculus, which I lovingly nicknamed Cankles. He began randomly talking about it with me outside of the game. He wrote an entire smut fanfiction about it, which he posted to the entire server. I was slightly wigged out, but I didn't know how to tell him no, and I definitely did not want to start an argument with him. He was notorious for believing he was infallible and morally superior to everyone around him. And considering he was a tanky USSR bootlicker, political discussions with him were a fucking nightmare. So imagine if I tried to tell him to cool it on this. If the man is anything like the nightmare blunt rotation of Infrared, Jabson Stinkle, or the Yankee Tanky, yeah, I could imagine those conversations would be about as enjoyable as edging a brain aneurysm. It got worse when he started asking me to sexually roleplay as Kane with him, so he could roleplay as Calculus and get his rocks off, which I obviously didn't do. This shit was intruding on our personal life. I had to create an entirely new PC to be in love with Calculus, so that he would finally flocking back off on this, and even that didn't quench his thirst. It got to the point where Toby, Kane's player, had to tell Sam that he didn't support the concept of Cankles becoming canon. It was getting insanely weird. But somehow, this isn't what ultimately caused the campaign to crash and burn. In late July 2023, I was beginning to lose steam on running the campaign. I was invested, but I didn't have as much time or energy to respond to people, and more players were slowly becoming inactive. However, Sam remained. With just as much gusto as ever, the game could run in a play-by-post format, and supply could no longer keep up with demand. The campaign entered a 2-week period of inactivity, and at the end of those 2 weeks, shit hit the fan. Outside of the campaign, I was in a prolonged argument with myself, Toby, and one other player. The argument touched on some really sensitive topics, which I won't divulge, and everyone involved made a lot of mistakes, which messed up our mental health for as long as the argument lasted. But eventually, we reached an agreement. For the time being, myself, Toby, and the other player were happy with how it had turned out. Sam, however, was not happy. He had heard about the whole ugly situation, and despite everyone directly involved being satisfied and in agreement, Sam decided he needed to speak up. I would like to stress that Sam was not directly involved here. In fact, he wasn't a factor at all. He was simply so full of himself and so self-righteous that he believed the moment he heard about it, it was his moral obligation to involve himself. Remember when I talked about Sam believing his opinions were objectively correct and that he could do no wrong? Yeah, this is where that really comes in. Sam decided to start publicly condemning me over the argument, calling me a bad person and saying that I violated Toby's trust. Keep in mind, myself and Toby had already apologized to each other and resolved this argument on our own. Toby himself was not involved with what Sam was doing, and not only did Sam not ask Toby if he could get involved and speak for him, but Sam believed it was his moral duty to speak for and over Toby. I tried to get Sam off myself and Toby's backs by telling him that he wasn't involved. He wasn't there, and he was stepping into an argument which had long been resolved. All of which was true. However, in response, Sam decided to take it another step further. He told me that he never liked me, that I was annoying, and that my friends weren't really my friends and only hung out with me out of pity. He told me I was a bad person, and that I needed to fix myself fundamentally if I wanted to earn his oh-so-coveted affection. He said I was a selfish narcissist. Projection, Sam? That I was destroying my friend's mental health, and that he had the inherent right to involve himself in any argument, and speak for any party involved if he saw something he deemed morally unacceptable. Obviously, this ruined our relationship. After 5 years of dating and being best friends, he broke up with me, blocked me, and sent me a photo of the word bitch keyed into a car. Whether he really did this or just got a photo off Google, I don't know. He had his breakdown, and things went quiet for a couple weeks as I tried to recover from the fallout. However, my recovery would quickly be thwarted by the announcement that he had stolen my campaign. One of my TTRPG gang invited me to a server where he was planning a direct reboot of my campaign and my original story, and had invited everyone from the original party except me. His grudge had not faded, and he decided to use that as an excuse to take up the helm of DM. When I joined and asked him what the hell was going on, he told me that I didn't own my story or the characters, and even had the audacity to ask me to privately tell him how the rest of the story was going to go so he could use it to steal my campaign even further. Obviously, it didn't take much questioning to realize why he wanted to do this. He wanted to write his uncomfortable OC fanfiction with the rest of the players minimally involved, and me and my pesky story completely out of the picture. I DM'd multiple players in his reboot campaign, and apparently, they weren't even interested in playing. They just joined because they felt like they had to, in order to appease Sam. After about a week of being spineless and not wanting another confrontation, the third person involved in the argument from earlier told me to stand up for myself. So I finally did. I told him that he had no claim to my story, and that if he wanted to write his little OC smut fanfic, he could do it somewhere that's not my story. 2 days later, the reboot campaign collapsed, and the server was deleted. This incident led to almost my entire TTRPG friend group falling apart. The 3-person argument got rekindled. Sam tried harder and harder to befriend Toby and isolate him from the rest of us, and eventually the argument came to a head when Toby betrayed my trust and intentionally destroyed my relationship with the rest of the friend group. As of writing this, I'm doing fine, but I do miss some of the people that this incident cut me off from. And Sam, if you're somehow reading this, you can get flocked, you delusional piece of shit. Hope this was a fun enough story despite the creepiness. If you happen to be in a relationship where you feel you can't tell the other no, stand up to them. You'll see how much they care about you when they can't push you around. Wow, these are probably the most normal Homestuck fans I've seen. Good on you, OP, for putting your foot down and kicking Sam to the curb. I feel like the moral of this story was a bit different than the rest of the ones we've covered on the channel. Normally, groups like this refuse to communicate with each other, and then fail to choose whether or not they're going to compromise or put the boot on someone who's proving to be incapable of being with the group any longer. But there was surprisingly a lot of conversations happening in this group, and the right decision was made. No, the moral of this story was far more simple. Sometimes, if you don't know what you're talking about, you can just shut the flock up. If something doesn't involve you, and no one asked, you can just shut the flock up. If you're about to tell your girlfriend that you'll only sleep with her when she puts on the elf ears and the barmaid outfit, first, get therapy, then shut the flock up. If you're heading to your next tabletop game with the express purpose to talk about how gulags were a necessary step in order to achieve socialism, then you, once again, can just shut the flock up. Did we learn something today, gang? No? Yeah, let's just move on. New DM here. In my few 6 to 8 months of DMing, I have a party of people who, although a bit chaotic, are really good players. We met through college, and we started a campaign, homebrewed, with a few campaign-borrowed elements. And we have gotten into a problem, which I'll spin a little yarn and tell you about it. Here is the cast. Lila Bonksta, the ex-barbarian fighter orc that wants gold to become wealthy. Timothy Smith, the rogue mastermind bard multi-class who wishes monetary gain for himself to become more powerful. Korvlox Winthman, the death domain Aasimar cleric who wishes to make their death god happy through whatever means. And last but not least, Kipper Twoclaw, our wizard kobold who wishes to be more magically inclined to help those who cannot protect themselves. The party ends up in one of the major cities created, and I've set up a line of shops to allow the party to shop around and gather gear they need to help them along. The party started to split and grab items they need as players, along with potions. Everyone but Kipper started to haggle, which is fine, but then haggling turned to demands, which then turned into stealing, which then became a stealing spree, and then that became a robbing spree. Kipper saw the snowball happen, and went to protect the people his party was threatening, casting mage armor, shield, etc. The inevitable happened. The guards surrounded the party and took them into custody, but Kipper and their player did a lot to prevent death and destruction to the shops and such. I don't want his player being punished for doing the right thing, but I don't know what to do. Well, there are a couple ways you can handle this. First method I'd like to call flock around and find out. There are obviously witnesses to the criminal events that have transpired here, and all you need to do is give a name to one in particular to vouch for the player that didn't want to participate in the Payday-esque crime spree. The rest get thrown in jail, and it's up to that player where they want to go from here. This second option builds off the first. Wheel it into a quest. That innocent bystander that witnessed the crime also happens to be a wealthy noble, who happens to be well aware of the party's capabilities. And what do you know? They happen to be in the market for adventuring types. This noble goes on to tell that player's character, maybe if you agree to help me, I can get these charges dropped. It was all a big misunderstanding after all. And now you can give them the option to recover the whole thing without anyone having to roll new characters or pass through prison time. Or the third option, throw them all in the brig, and make it a jailbreak session. maybe that one NPC is instead an innocent passerby, who even goes out of their way to assist that particular do-gooder's character, on the basis that they were wrongly convicted for the crimes of their fellows, come what may afterwards. Hope any of this advice helps, user amateur DM752, and I hope your next post about this game is on a less notorious subreddit. But as for the rest of us, that's it for today's stories. And if you enjoyed today's stories and would like to hear more of them, then please consider liking this video and subscribing to the Crow's Perch. Made it this far? Why not leave a comment? Can't think of a comment? Then leave the comment, Campaign Reboot. That way I know you made it to the end of today's stories. And if you want to further support the Crow's Perch, then follow the link in the description to the Crow's Perch Patreon, where you can donate as little as $1 a month. Those who support higher have their names listed on the screen right now. They are all amazing members of the bird aristocracy who shall live on, immortalized in stone or text in a background. And with all of that out of the way, I shall see you next time as the crow flies. Oh, also, this isn't like a reboot to Art of the Week, but someone sent me this in the fan art channel. It's as cursed as it looks. To the fan artist, who is also a patron and grad on the Crow's Perch Discord, die.